Then Tomer will give a hands-on session for 2 hours. That will be quite interesting. And then Adam and Itai from Intel will be talking about dynamic channel selection. Next up, Mario from Max Linear will be talking about unit testing. And then by 4:30 in the afternoon, UTC time, we will be finishing up. So yeah, all of these timestamps are in UTC. So add or subtract your UTC offset to find out what it is in your local time. So yeah, please apologize. Please accept my apologies. I got an email from Shelly that I want to try out to look at. She said I'm still trying to fix things. So message Wouter to let him know what's happening. So perhaps he'll be able to pop in until I'm there or in my absence. So yeah, Wouter, if you are there. No, we don't have Wouter at the moment. But I do have the slides here that Shelly was planning to give. So I hope she still manages to show up, but if not, I guess we can wing it and we can talk about it together. Yeah. So I think it might be nice if Arnout, if you could take the lead on this.
Yes. So I think I can now. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Can you also see me, by the way? Because that's not very...
yeah.
Yay. Okay. So the first talk is about Purple in general. We've been working for prplMesh, which is a Purple project for a long time now, but maybe it's useful to also know what Purple really is. So Purple is a foundation. It's a non-profit organization, which is a collaboration between industrial partners, so between companies, and it's actually fairly generic. The only really key thing about Purple is that it's open source. In practice, though, it's mostly about the Wi-Fi and router platforms that are used in CPE, so in home gateways, in repeaters, and in well, devices like that. And then so it's driven by the members of Purple. So the members are companies or other organizations that pay membership fee. There are more than 30 of them. I think the next slide probably has a list of them. And in total, more than 200 engineers that are active in it. Sorry. You can see on Slack how many people are registered there. On Basecamp also, you have these huge lists of people who are involved. So the mission of Purple, I'm going to paraphrase it and not just read it. By the way, Dave, if I'm saying anything wrong, please correct me, or anybody else, by the way. So the mission of Purple is to bring more open source into the businesses and to bring more from the businesses into open source, and to create communities involving mostly engineers that are doing this for a daytime job. So not like many other open source projects that are more, you know, hackers doing stuff in the evening. The purpose of Purple is really to work on open source for businesses. And it does that by, actually the primary tool for Purple is to create open standards. So not so much, well, the primary tool is to create open standards. So defining APIs, defining ways that different pieces should fit together, defining architectures. So that's the main tool, and the other tool is what we do in prplMesh, is to make sure that open source software projects can happen by participating in them, so by putting manpower in existing projects, by funding them, like is the case for prplMesh, and by hosting them, so by just providing the platforms where communities can collaborate. Okay, this is one of these management slides that I find hard to explain. So it basically says the same as the mission, but now in a more graphical way. So it's this open APIs, the open standards on the one hand, and open source implementations on the other hand. And then next to that come advocacy. So this is the convincing the movers and shakers in companies that it's important to invest in open source. And on the other hand, security, which is something that is typically lacking in open source projects, is the security aspect, and even companies are not always paying enough attention to it. And so one of the goals, or one of the values of prpl is that prpl cares about security. In prplMesh we haven't seen too much of that yet, but in particular in prpl there is a heavy one of the things that is important in prpl is improve the security of OpenWRT. So there are a lot of activities. prplMesh is one of them. I can say a little bit about the other activities, but maybe other people like Zhao can say a lot more about the Highlevel API, I'm sure. So everybody please correct me or add to what I'm saying when necessary. prplMesh is one activity. I think everybody here is familiar with prplMesh, so making an open source implementation of the multi-AP specification and certifiable Easymesh. Then the low-level API is a definition of the hardware abstraction layers, you could say, the interfaces towards the low level. And doing this also in an open source way. So on the one hand, it's harmonizing the BSPs that you have at the moment. So every chip vendor or SoC vendor comes with a BSP which has some interfaces to control the hardware. The low-level API wants to standardize it and also move it into the kernel. So make sure that from most APIs, it should be part of the kernel. So make sure that the upstream kernel, the official Linux kernel, has these APIs, which is an enabler for the drivers to also end up in the upstream kernel. So the high-level API is a second activity. There, the idea is to define the interfaces that are exposed by different components in the software stack running on a CPE, and so that you can make other software on top of that. So make services on top of that, which are portable to different software stacks. So the idea is that...
Can I interject with a quick question? It's
yes,
Jonathan Maisel from Inango Systems. About the high-level API, is that a user space API or is it a kernel level as well?
No, it's a user space API for sure. So it's an API that will be exposed on the system bus, which in OpenWRT, for instance, is UBus. In RDKB, it is this dbus-based RDK interface. In Soft at Home, the Soft at Home operating platform, it would be the PCB. So it's an API, which is basically a definition of a set of
you answered the question. Okay, thank you.
Zhao made an interesting addition. Is not just the API, but the Highlevel API activity is also developing a library that makes abstraction of the bus, so that you can make software using that library that runs both on OpenWRT and RDKB.
Okay. Thanks.
And Zhao made another comment. Zhao also says, I guess Zhao doesn't have working audio. Zhao also says we are working with the broadband forum to try to see if we can converge with USB. So yeah, basically with in the definition of the API, the idea is to stay close to other standards. So not have yet another standard, but have a single specification. Okay, then prpl it is an improvements, let's say, on OpenWRT, improvements that is intended to go upstream, and that is also happening. So the changes that are made for prpl are being brought to upstream OpenWRT. To make OpenWRT more secure and also more component based, to make it possible to or easier to integrate different OpenWRT based software from different software providers. If somebody can correct me on this, that would be good, because I'm also not 100% sure of this.
Wouter here. It's actually something that is constantly asked of what is actually the goal of prpl, and it's different things to different people. The one aspect is that it's support for actual silicon vendor hardware, whereas upstream OpenWRT only supports fully open source platforms. The second aspect is the carrier grade aspects. So security reviews is part of that, and adding additional features such as a USB agent to it, or TR69 client, which is something that was started but never actually finished. But the USB is actually going forth, is a part of that. It's also, and adding prpLMesh is a part of it as well. It's also a showcase for all of the different projects, which means that if we get something done in the low-level API, then we want to make sure that that actually gets implemented as such in prpl. And then the upstreaming part is absolutely true. What Arnout said, the intention is to upstream this to OpenWRT. We have OpenWRT community members in the project. And then the final aspect is maybe a little bit of a transformation into a more project-oriented thing, which means that prpl would take the requirements of a bunch of carriers who are interested in the project, and that the various companies doing development in it would actually work against those requirements and coordinate and really make it into a combined carrier open source stack. As is the case, for example, for RDKB already. It's an open source project between different operators and different vendors, but with the clear intention of making sure that the code goes back to the open source community and to OpenWRT. It's a pass-through, it's not a project, self-standing project.
Right.
But if you ask a different person, you'll get a different answer. That's just my attempt of collecting the different views.
I think your answer covers so much ground that it probably covers all the answers from different people. So prplMesh we discussed. Security assurance. I did not actually know that that was a separate activity. I do know that prpl has invested in doing evaluations of the security of the different activities.
At the moment, last that I've seen, I haven't been able to join the last couple of meetings, but a collaborative document with security requirements for a router stack has been built. So that goes back into this mode of the operators actually passing in their requirements and coordinating between them what it is that we would expect from a carrier-grade router stack. And then from there on, development can start, like a secure boot mechanism that verifies signatures or something like that, and all sorts of secure management of private data, things, guidelines really on how to manage these things in a router stack. There have been other things discussed in the past, such as automated testing with fuzzing and all sorts of security aspects. Originally, it started as in something that was completely independent of prpl-WRT, and there was actually development of a trusted execution environment that was launched from a bootloader and all sorts of things. But that's all stopped. Now it's much more focused on the security of prpl-WRT and the other projects.
And then finally, lifecycle management. There, the idea is to have a way of deploying software components coming from, coming from different vendors on the device without knowing too much about the underlying stack, and also with security in mind, so that if one of these components gets subverted, it cannot subvert completely the CPE, but only the part that it was responsible for. So it's basically a bit similar to like Docker, Flatpak, all these containerization projects. But then, first of all, with a very important lifecycle approach. So having keeping track of what is installed, what is running, and how doing dependency management and things like that. And on the other hand, with an important aspect of, well, giving the controls over router-specific topics. For example, it should be possible, I'm not sure if that is already in the in scope now, but eventually it should be possible to deploy a firewall like that. In a firewall, of course, it needs to have heavy interaction into the network stack. Java adds LCM is also a cross-platform initiative. We plan to deploy it on both OpenWRT and RDKB. I'm not sure what LCM was, but is it lifecycle management? Yeah, lifecycle management. So yeah, it's indeed it's not just for OpenWRT, it's also for RDKB.
The only project that is OpenWRT specific is prpl-WRT. Everything else is really for anything.
Okay, so here's another slide about the low-level API. The idea being that the SOC vendors can provide the drivers that implement this low-level API. and as much as possible, standard APIs are used. So, for instance, for Wi-Fi, CFG 822.11, which is the kernel interface for Wi-Fi. For some things like POM, there nothing exists at the moment, and something will have to be invented. Particularly interesting one is acceleration. So in the upstream kernel, there is already a switch manager, which is called DSA, and you have QoS manager, traffic control. But all of that all of that ties in with the acceleration fabric. So it's going to be an interesting topic to define low-level API for acceleration.
Interesting anecdote is that the prpplMesh project started from the low-level API working group, where we had defined this config 802.11 interface that we wanted the wireless silicon vendors to adhere to in their device drivers, and we needed a way to test that. So prpplMesh started as a QA platform, a certification platform for the low-level API of wireless. It spun a little bit out of control.
Yeah, same thing again. So I think this is the justification of why we want to have API definitions. So basically, the idea is that if you develop your own services, you want to run on several devices or even several platforms. So the low-level API is basically to be able to run on several devices or several chips that you can replace one chip with another one, and that you don't have to basically redesign all your software, but that there is a chance to be able to port it. There's probably still going to be some debugging and maybe even changes to be done, but at least it's possible to port it. And then the high-level API, same story, but then porting to a completely different platform with maybe even a different OS.
prpplMesh is an important aspect of that in the sense that it's high-level API, so its northbound interface is supposed to deliver a standard high-level API. That would be the standard interface for all wireless management on all Linux-based router platforms. So it's not just on OpenWRT, but even between RDKB and OpenWRT and proprietary stacks, this should actually make sure that all of these higher layers of your web UI, of your local provisioning, of your management platform, interacting with the device, of your telemetry and statistics gathering is all done in a standard manner for everybody.
Okay, so I didn't realize there was going to be a slide for each activity, so this is just repeating what we said before. So yeah, a high-level API, as said before, it's about being able to develop application software and run it on any platform. Yeah, examples, these are good. So in Wi-Fi, it's pretty obvious. It's activating and deactivating it and configuring interfaces, things like that. But it's also about things like adding user accounts, configuring firewalls, configuring DSL, configuring DHCP, the addresses and fixed statically assigned DHCP addresses. configuring, or not so much configuring, but detecting USB devices. So which, like if you have an external hard drive attached, detecting that it's there and using it as a NAS. Controlling TV, things like that. prpl, I think we discussed that quite a lot. Yeah, something, if you can go back one. What Wouter did not mention was the validation and certification.
Yeah, that's really not, it's a project per project thing. I know what's to be done for the low-level API, and what Purple WRT is actually doing is an important aspect of that. But I'm not aware of any coordinated effort between the different working groups. So we should mostly focus on the, well, for the low-level API, for example, we've said that we will try to cooperate with other test labs as much as possible, and with standards organization. So that being able to do the Wi-Fi Alliance certification tests on prplMesh on a prplMesh stack that uses the low-level API is an important manner of testing, the way of testing the low-level API, as is data element certification of the Wi-Fi Alliance, as would be, which is what we're hoping to achieve at some point in time, TR398, I think, the in-home wireless testing requirement, specification of the broadband forum, for which also test labs exist and test setups exist, and that keeps getting enhanced in newer issues of the test. We hope that we'll be able to add some of the low level and some of the mesh aspects of prplMesh into that. Yes, thanks, Joao. It's 398. Yes.
So prplMesh, yeah, that's an interesting one. So in prplMesh, we're making an open source implementation of Easymesh. And also, prplMesh is intended to be platform agnostic, so not simply, which basically means not tied to a specific chipset, because all the other existing Easymesh implementations are tied to a specific chipset. They're provided by the chipset vendors. And what the purpose of prplMesh is to make it independent of the chipset by using this low-level API. Platform agnostic also means it should run both on RDKB and on OpenWRT. At the moment, we are focusing on OpenWRT, but eventually it should also be ported to RDKB. As a side note, Intel is using it in RDKB, in their RDKB offering, but the integration there is not yet the way that we intend it to be, because it's actually well, it's not really integrated with the RDKB halls in a proper way, as far as I understand.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hack. You have the existing Wi-Fi agent, which means you have the standard, the same provisioning of the single access point on the gateway, and then you have the hardware abstraction layer below that. And in the hardware abstraction layer, they actually use UCI and UBus to launch to interact with prplMesh to configure the whole extender. So from a management aspect, it's completely hidden from the router stack, and that's not the intention at all. But the good thing is that, yes, it is effectively in an RDKB build somewhere.
Basically, the idea now in RDKB is just to use prplMesh for APIs, for steering APIs, for monitor APIs. It's not really used to the full extent of what it is designed. But eventually, once we have RDKB for a repeater, this will have to change.
So that work on RDKB, will that be done privately, or will that be done in Purple?
Currently, we can't really work on RDKB, on the Intel RDKB version. For the same reason we can't really work on the Intel UGW version, because of, it's not open source. So it will be done privately, but I hope that we will also do that. The community can do the same for the upstream RDKB version, and then it will be available for everyone as well.
Yes. So the RDKM are actually funding this. There is a team who have done the port of RDKB to the Turis Omnia and who have built an open source config 802.11 Wi-Fi hull, still developing that, and they're ready to jump in here and start porting prplMesh.
So Wouter, your work will be public in Purple?
Yes, absolutely. It'll be public in Purple and public in RDKB, because RDKB at the end of the day is open embedded based, which means that it pulls in open source code from all sorts of different repositories. For example, the Bloom OpenSync agent is in RDKB simply because there is there are recipes that pull in the Bloom code from GitHub. So we can do the same thing. We can have the recipes in RDKB that pull in the prplMesh code from our GitHub or GitLab or wherever we want to permanently host it and build it.
Okay, and Tomer, perhaps you can leverage the open work that's done by Wouter and Purple.
Yeah, maybe after we finish with the certification, it probably be on milestone 3. It will be one of the important stuff.
That's why I've been holding them off a little bit. They are offering since a month or so, but I'm trying to slow them down and tell them that you could take a look at it. You could try to build a controller by yourself and integrate that, which is a low bar of entry. But I don't want these guys to flood you with support requests. I'll try to build it up, that they build up some experience on their own before they start engaging. And it's not just them, because I saw, is it Hydron, I think, asking questions in prplMesh dev on RDKB integration. So we should all join hands actually.
Yeah, I've been talking for quite a time with one of the guys who's working from Hydron. So it looks like he's been doing good progress.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's continue.
So security assurance, I still don't know anything about it, but I guess this is all what we said before. Hello. And then lifecycle management. Yeah, it's wow, wall of text. The last words basically say it. It's an app store-like model. That is the end goal, to enable an store-like model where you can install independent components on the CPE, and they can, they are, you're protected from them doing bad things, and they can be removed again. And things don't break down when you install some random components. I have no idea what this slide is supposed to express. Good one. is a red level fast. So in prplMesh we were supposed to be working on R2, the Easymesh R2 already.
Yeah, this is not quite correct anymore. Yeah.
I don't know how it is for the other projects. Yeah, this is also something I have not experienced, so I don't know exactly what the message is here.
Wouter, maybe you could pitch in?
I always ignore this type of slides. This is more management executive overview, so it's all a bit fuzzy. The previous slide then. This slide, there is actually, and this is evolving still, we're making the whole prpl organization a little bit more structured, a little bit more processed, well, a lot more process driven. So additional processes are being set up of who defines and approves the requirements for the certain working groups and the charters within which those working groups can work. How do we get approval of those requirements? You know, what type of voting will there be involved? When the requirements are complete, it's handed over to the technical steering committee who will then actually create an implementation. And then later we need to, at the far right, we have to make sure that we set up tests for certain of these things if there are multiple vendors involved, such as which is in the case of the low-level API, for example, where the implementation ultimately happens through the vendors. But it's just an attempt to make it prpl a more professional organization. It's been a lot of ad lib in the different working groups so far, and a lot of work has been done, but we needed structure. And that is now possible now that we have a lot more members, a lot more funding, and operators really invested into this and looking into what we're developing as something that they can really use and deploy. And here's another way of drawing the same pictures. We have the different parts in prpl driving all the working groups. LCM, for example, is not in the list in the implementation, but that's in there somewhere as well. So this is just the same flow that I just mentioned of defining what to do, actually working on the architecture, doing the implementation, and then testing it.
And this is then the ad to invite you to join, which I don't suppose is relevant for anybody here, because you're already members.
Well, maybe not everyone, maybe. So yeah, David, this is another opportunity for you to give a sales pitch.
Oh, great. Actually, I think we probably should pass on this one. I mean, it's good if you guys join prpl and become a member. The dues that you pay, the annual dues that you pay, do end up going into the project budgets. So it's a good thing overall for companies to join the foundation.
Okay. So that's all the slides. I think we finished right in time. So now I leave the floor for questions and other comments and remarks. So shoot.
Hi, it's Jonathan from Inango here. Thanks for the presentation, guys. Just a quick question about the IDKB part. If we want to follow up with anyone within Purple about that, I don't want to do it now on the call, but if we want to follow up with them, who's the best person to contact? Is that Wouter or someone else?
Yeah, start by talking to me. I'll start pulling people together and see if we maybe have a kickoff call sometime in the next couple of weeks between all the interested parties.
All right, I'll shoot you an email in a day or two then. Thanks, Wouter.
Right.
Okay, any other questions?
A small technical question: are the next session on the same link, or do we have to enter a new link for each session? And is it okay to just stay on this call?
Yes, it's okay to stay on this call. We will keep using the same Zoom room, so it's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I will also try if I can already publish the recording immediately after this session.
Yeah, good plan. Thank you, Arnout. Anyone else? So if there are no more questions or comments or remarks, then I suggest that we take a short break, and at 11 o'clock we will continue with the next presentation.
Well, whatever time it is in your time zone.
Yeah, so the next presentation is from Max Linear about JSSEM and how it ties in with prplMesh. So yeah, that's coming up next. So yeah, see you in 8 minutes then.